This podcast is for you if you want to learn about the wonderful and wacky world of the English language and the people who speak it. If you want to learn English, speak English, and understand different speakers of English, then you're in the right place and you're going to love our podcast episode today. Welcome to English World with Kris and Amerikos. We are a team of language lovers, expert teachers, and native speakers who are on a mission to help people around the world speak English and show the world their true value. We correct mistakes, practice pronunciation, and explore grammar rules while drinking coffee and having fun. So get comfortable, relax, grab a pen and paper, and welcome to the show. Today's episode is brought to you by English Every Day, an unlimited speaking practice program where you can join live speaking practice lessons with professional native teachers 5 times every day. There are a lot of courses on the internet and a lot of useful videos too, but the one thing that is missing for most English learners is practice. And if you need speaking practice, then English Every Day is for you. So click the link in the description or go to krisamerikos.com to learn more today. Okay, today we have Matt Tait with us, and Matt is in Poland at the moment. Is that right?
That's right, yeah.
And so you've been teaching English in Poland for some time, but that's not the only place where you've taught English.
Actually, it's the only place where I've taught English. I've lived in other countries, though.
Okay. So in other countries, because I know that you're a very cosmopolitan guy. You've been around the world and lived in a lot of places. So I really want to unpack that more today. So you've only taught in Poland. What were you doing in the other countries?
Well, I'm from England, so I grew up in England. I lived there for most of my life. But during COVID in 2020, I took advantage of a break in lockdowns to join my closest friend living in Portugal. So I lived in Portugal for just over a year, and the weather was amazing. Definitely a downgrade to move to Poland for weather.
It's better than English weather?
In Poland?
No, in Portugal.
Oh, Portugal. Oh, way better. Way better. Yeah. So honestly, it's the nicest weather I've ever experienced. It was for 6 months or something. I didn't see a cloud in the sky. It was between 18 and 25 degrees. It was just glorious.
That's amazing. That's on my list because right now, Tanya, who's like the top person in our company, she moved to Lisbon.
Okay.
So I've been trying to find excuses to get there, and this is just one more. Weather.
Yeah, weather, tick. Yeah, for sure. I live quite near to Lisbon, not in Lisbon itself, but in a town near to Lisbon called Cascais, which is more of like a resort town. Lots of tourists go there for holidays, Germans and English people particularly. Very nice.
Awesome. Yeah, and then Poland is just a completely different element, right?
Yeah, whole different thing. Yeah, so I moved to Poland really because I had some friends here. My friendship group in Portugal dispersed. Let's say they moved to different places, and it turned out that Wrocław in Western Poland was a place where I had at least more than one friend living in the same place. So I have lots of friends living in all random places. So it's nice to be in an area where you've got more than one friend. It gives you a bit more reason to be there. But I've been a fan of Poland for quite a long time. I first came here in 2016 just for a holiday, and found lots of reasons to visit again. And so I made lots of visits and made some friends. And I guess that teed me up for moving here eventually. I don't know if I'm here forever, but we'll see.
Oh, so it feels like that could be the case, though.
It could be. Yeah, it could be. I like it enough here where it's a possibility, but I wouldn't commit 100% to where I will be in the future. I mean, I would hesitate to say that I was very cosmopolitan. I've lived in England most of my life, pretty much in the same place that all of my family live. So, I've kind of been a hobbit for a good part of my life, just living in the Shire. But yeah, I lived in Portugal. Other than Portugal and Poland, those are the only places really that I lived.
Cool. So, but it's given you a good idea of kind of the different sides of Europe.
Yeah. So I've been in Portugal. You can go to the most westerly point of mainland Europe.
Hmm.
So you can look out across the sea and you know that in terms of Europe, this is the closest you can stand to the USA, for example, which would be straight across the Atlantic. So that's quite cool. And obviously Poland, you can if you call Poland Eastern Europe, the Poles will argue a bit with you. Central Europe, central. You know, but,
That's funny.
from yeah, I think for people from America or the UK or Western Europe, we would consider Poland to be Eastern Europe. So we can argue the toss on that, but it's definitely something Eastern about here. But there is also something which is distinctly Central European, particularly in Western Poland, because it's originally a German city. So the architecture is in the German style, and lots of the historical places here have German history rather than Polish history.
Yeah. So in that region of Poland, do you find that German is more prevalent as a second language than English, or even as a first language?
Not as a first language at all, because after the Second World War, the Germans of Breslau, as the city was called, were told to go back to within the limits of the new Germany.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, it's kind of interesting because a lot of the Poles that live here came from another city. So the city of Lvov, as the Poles call it, or Lviv in Ukraine. And so lots and lots of the people who live in Wrocław trace their ancestry back to that part of what's now Ukraine, which used to be a Polish city. So all of the Poles were told to get out of Lviv because it was being given to the Ukrainians. And then they came here and the Germans were kicked out of here and sent back to modern day Germany. So
It's crazy to think that happened in our recent history, that
yeah,
this mass migration, forced migration. And I guess in some parts of the world, it still is happening now. But Europe, for some reason, growing up as a kid, I learned so much history and geography, and it was just this static thing in my mind. So I remember the first time that broke was in the Bosnian War.
yeah.
Yugoslavia became all of these other states, and it's hard sometimes to imagine that it's not a static border and it's fluid and it's changing.
Yeah. Yes, it's completely bizarre to a British person as well, because our borders have been mostly fixed for hundreds and hundreds of years. We're basically an island. Britain at least is an island. So the idea of borders changing like that is something that we haven't really experienced.
I guess being from the UK, though, you can probably comment on, what does it feel like for your country to kind of have multiple names and categories? So like there's different categories that you could fit into, right? Like you can be British, but you can also be English, but you can also be a UK citizen. And then someone from Wales might qualify for some of those names, but not all of them, and then also be Welsh. And then so it's kind of confusing, I think, when people start learning English and they usually learn, about the UK first, and then they're learning about Wales and Scotland and Ireland and Northern Ireland. And so how does that feel? And then with Brexit, you're officially European, and then now it's like, again, is it a European place or not? Or right? So all these questions. So what does it feel like to be from the UK, which is always kind of changing names, or there's so many names for it?
Yeah, I guess it doesn't really feel confusing because I know who I am. I know what I am. I'm English. That's kind of like my tribe. If you want to think of it, it's got like a feeling of that's what I am. I'm English. But I'm also part of Great Britain, so I'm British, and this is a kind of civic identity. So we have such a long history with the Welsh and the Scots that, although we might argue we might fight like brothers, we're still brothers at the end of the day, and we've been through a lot together. So, I'm English and British, although I think my passport says United Kingdom. Or maybe it says the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. So, it gets quite long. But it definitely causes some confusion for foreigners. But I think with social media, these memes go round, and I think people are starting to say, oh, yeah, okay, I get it now.
So as you've been moving around to different places, what are some of the, challenges that you've faced? Because I think a lot of people who listen to this are learning English, or they love learning languages, and it's a challenge when you go to the place, even if you've studied the language before, and some of them are going to places where they've never studied the language. So what kind of challenges did you face moving to different countries and living in different countries?
Well, I think as a native English speaker, or someone who speaks English, even if you're not native, it's a huge advantage. So, of course, if you are an English speaker as your first language, then we've got a reputation for being a bit lazy for learning other people's languages, because often it's not necessary. And to be honest, living in Portugal, speaking Portuguese wasn't really necessary.
Oh,
Speaking English is good enough with most people. Portugal has a long history with Britain, and there's a big tourist industry there. So even some of the older people speak English quite well because they work in hotels, in restaurants, in places related to tourism. So I did learn a tiny amount of Portuguese, but to be honest, learning Portuguese for me was, at least at the basic level, was a bit of a thankless task, because I would learn something and I try to use it, but the Portuguese language has a very particular, strange pronunciation. So I can't remember the details, but I remember learning, maybe it was like on Duolingo, of course, on Duolingo, they give you Brazilian Portuguese. So I maybe learned to say, like, excuse me, and it was desculpe, something like that. But the Portuguese, I would often hear them say, desculpe, this very closed sound. And for me, I couldn't understand it. And when I said what I'd learned, they wouldn't understand. And they would immediately know that you probably spoke English, and then they would immediately start speaking English to you.
uh-huh.
So yeah, it was a bit of a thankless task. I tried a little because I like to challenge myself a bit, and I like to make an effort to show that I'm not a typical, British person, never bothered to learn anyone else's language. But I can't say I got very far with it. But yeah, as I said, so many people speak English, and in a city like Lisbon is very international. There's lots of Brazilians in Portugal generally. And then in Lisbon, there's lots of Germans and people from everywhere in the world. And the common language, English.
So when you were describing the situation, I don't want to appear to be a typical British person. You use British, not English. And so again, I'm just interested in this question. Like, would you say that that's a typical British thing or a typical English thing, or is there even any difference? In this case, are they interchangeable or?
In this case, I would say is kind of interchangeable. What I really mean is a typical English speaker from the United Kingdom. So when I say typical, I don't want to be a typical English person, but Scottish people, Welsh people, Irish people, I think we're all the same in that we speak English. We're a bit lazy to learn other people's languages. So it's a bit more typically British. Although I think Americans can be classed in there as well. Australians, Canadians, all of us really.
Yeah, I think there's Americans feel like we have this stereotype too, because a lot of times people will go to other countries and it's not even the language, but just the way that things work. They kind of want everything to be the same as in America. And I had a situation where I was working with one teacher and his mom came to visit. We were living in Russia. His mom came to visit him, and we went to some shop. And there was a long line and people were cutting in front of her. And she said, she made some statement like, this would never happen in America. And like some people understand enough English to understand. So they like, look at her like, what are you talking about? But yeah, I guess that's typical of everyone. Like I see Russians, others who come to the States, and they kind of have the same attitude at first. It's like, well, why does this work this way? Why can't it just work the way that I'm used to it working? And even me, like when I came back to the States after living abroad for 8 years, I had to go through some of those adjustments too. So like, what are some of the, hidden pitfalls that people might not think about when it comes to, moving to these different countries and trying to establish yourself there? I mean, you've done it successfully. You lived there for a long period of time and you found friend groups and you were able to continue the movement, the trip. So like, what are some of the pitfalls that people should watch out for?
You're absolutely right that, we're used to doing things the way that we're familiar with in our own country. So I can't say that the bureaucracy in England is great, super fun. It's always a pain. But moving to Portugal, I definitely found the bureaucracy to be far worse. If you want to open a bank account, you need to have this document. To get this document, you first need to go to this other office that's in Lisbon to get a tax number. To get the tax number, you need to apply online for something else. So you're constantly tracking back from what you want and trying to tick all these boxes to get something which in England would be fairly easy to get. So I guess you just have to be patient and just accept that you're in a different country. When in Rome, do as the Romans do. All the people here have to go through the same. So I guess just be patient and just have to be a bit tolerant for the different ways that countries do things.
I'm interested in that phrase, when in Rome, do as the Romans do, because I know that a lot of my Russian students use the same phrase. Like in Russian, they say this phrase, but usually about Moscow. When in Moscow, do as the Muscovites do. I'm wondering if in Poland they say, and when in Krakow, because I think Ukrainians probably say Kiev, and like, I wonder if this is a phrase that changes in different places, but it's interesting that we don't say when in London or when in New York or something.
Yeah. I don't know the source of the phrase, but I guess it kind of makes more sense to me to use a foreign example because, London or Manchester, it's not going to be that much different. But in Rome, you might have to do things in a different way.
Or the phrase Rome wasn't built in a day.
Yeah.
So English is so connected to Latin and Greek. And so I feel like the European languages, we have a big advantage learning them as English speakers because there are a lot of similarities and a lot of things where, even though it seems like we're really different people, we have a lot of the same perspectives and a lot of the same beliefs, especially when you compare us to people on the other side of the globe. So I think the influence of different languages, of one language on another, especially today, English influencing other languages so much. Sometimes, people see it as like the language of the invaders, the language of the people who are trying to control us. And sometimes people see it as just like the language of opportunity, international communication, which of course is true too, but I'm sure you're familiar with, like in France, they have some special laws about the language to prevent the further encroachment of the English language. What about in Portugal and in Poland? Did you notice anything, like any attitudes towards English speaking or anything like this? Or most people are just friendly because you're a tourist?
To be honest, I've traveled quite a lot. I've been to a lot of countries in Europe. I haven't traveled that much, for example, in Asia or Africa or South America. But in all the European countries I've been to, I've always found that everyone was helpful, friendly, and were, polite to me. In some places, I would say more friendly than others. For example, when I went to a small city in eastern Poland, I've never met such friendliness in my whole life. And I think it's because I was strange there. They don't have many people from England going around in Lublin in eastern Poland. So, it was like, why are you here? It's amazing. And there was like, come to my house for dinner and come to our house party and stuff, just because they thought it was so interesting, such a rare opportunity. And a lot of people hadn't even met someone who was a native English speaker before. And actually, even here in Wrocław, which is a bit more international, I still meet people who say they've never met a native English speaker before. So generally, I would say people are really very open, and as an English speaker, I'm generally treated, if anything, more nicely than they would treat some of their own people. So I often say to the Poles, Polish people are really friendly, and they say, "Oh, we're not." They really don't think they're friendly. So it might just be that they are particularly friendly to specific types of outsiders. I think that the Poles generally are quite friendly to Germans and West European people. And certainly as someone from England, I've only ever been treated very positively in Portugal and in Poland. Of course, in Portugal, I think this is our oldest alliance. So we've always been fighting with the Portuguese. We fought with the Portuguese against the Spanish. We fought with them against Napoleon. And our friendship has gone for centuries. And there's no real animosity there for English speakers in Portugal either.
That's great to hear. I was just thinking about something else. When a person moves to another country, one of the tendencies is to immediately reach out to your diaspora, the other people from your country. And how beneficial or detrimental do you think that can be to someone assimilating or getting by, at least in that country? What do you think?
I think it can be quite a positive thing at the beginning. So if you arrive in a new place and you don't know anyone, I think it's kind of the low-hanging fruit is to find other people who are also in your situation from your own country or culture. So I think it can be very, very positive, and it can make you feel a bit more settled and a bit more at home in your new place. But I have kind of experienced that it's not everything. You want to find people who share your interests, people who are on the same level as you. So let's say, if you want to meet people who have got a lot of ambition, and maybe they're business people, they're running their own business. And I like to be around people who are like that, because I'm an ambitious person. And whether that person is from England or Portugal, Poland, or anywhere else, it doesn't really matter to me. If we communicate well and we've got shared interests, it's much more valuable than just being a random person from your home country. So I've got a very big mixture of friends here in Poland. I've got some Polish friends. I've got some Ukrainian friends, because there's lots and lots of Ukrainians here since this war started in Ukraine. And I've got a few friends who are native speakers. One Australian friend. Actually, here I don't have any British friends.
Do you find a lot of cultural differences with your Aussie friend? Or
I would say, if I had to say one culture that was the most similar to British cultures, English culture, probably is going to be Australians.
Yeah,
super similar. They like to make silly jokes all the time. They like to drink a little bit too much beer, and generally they're pretty fun people. So when I meet Australians, they're always good fun. So to be honest, I don't really notice many differences in our culture. Of course, there's a few language differences. Occasionally I'll use some slang and it means something different in Australia. Had this recently. Your shout was the expression. So my friend said, your shout. And he meant it's your round, it's your turn to buy the beers. But in England, your shout, it means it's your decision. You have to make a choice.
Wow. Yeah, and in the States, we don't even use this phrase at all.
No?
Your shout, I think
shout.
People would be really confused.
Okay.
Yeah. This is the stuff that I tell students who ask about these questions. Like, can Americans and British English speakers, can they understand each other? And I'm like, yeah, we understand each other. But when people use slang is regional, slang's different. And yeah, another one is like, if you say that somebody's pissed, he's pissed.
Mm-hmm.
This one is different, because in American English, that just means that he's really angry.
Mm-hmm. And I guess you know what it means in Britain.
I have an idea, but I'll let you clarify.
Yeah, if you're pissed in England, or I think generally in the UK, it means you're really drunk.
Yeah. And I think in Australia they say the same, if I'm not mistaken.
I think so. I mean, I think in some ways British people can understand American slang more easily because of the film industry, American TV shows and music. And I think probably that Americans really enjoy British television and films and music as well, but I think probably we have a greater amount of it, so we get to hear more of the slang from the USA. So yeah. I would understand if you said I'm pissed, I'd probably, I'd take a quick little cog turn in my mind and I'd know, okay, he means angry.
The funniest situation was when I was teaching. It was like my first year or even first like 2 months of teaching in Russia. And this British English woman, real nice, real attractive, blonde woman, she was teaching in the room next door. I'm in the middle of teaching the lesson and I hear this knock on the door. I'm like, okay, come in. And the teacher comes in. She's like, excuse me, Kris, do you have a rubber? and I had like, okay. I was just like, what? And then like you just said, like the gears start turning and I'm like, oh, British English. Yes. Because for us, we always call it an eraser.
Yeah.
And a rubber is something that people use for safe sex.
Yeah. Yeah, it took the cogs to turn a little bit in my mind when you said about rubber. I was like, oh yeah, I can see the mistake there, yeah.
That was a funny situation. And then I got to explain it to the students. So teachable moment.
A teachable moment, exactly. Yeah.
Awesome. So what do you think are some of the cultural elements of speaking a language? A lot of times when a person is learning a language, especially people who have like an upper intermediate, advanced, even proficiency level English, sometimes they've kind of missed the boat on learning how culture and language work together. Mm-hmm. And so they'll say things that might be okay in their language, but it kind of sounds rude, or it sounds like, or maybe they're, taking high level words and trying to force them into simple sentences. I had one guy, instead of telling me that he was sick or that he was ill, he told me that he has a malaise. and so when I corrected him, he's like, but that word means that, right? Yes, it means that, but it's not like, when are you going to use that? So what do you think? What are some of the cultural elements of speaking a language that people might miss?
Well, there's definitely a lot of things that are like that. For example, levels of politeness. I remember when I was in England, I had a customer who was an older woman from the Czech Republic, and she would always call me Mr. Matt. So she could call me Matt or Mr. Tait, but to call me Mr. Matt, it sounded a bit strange to me. I didn't really understand why she called me that. But then I understood that that's what they do in the Czech Republic. They use your first name with the title. So a few things like that. And back to sort of levels of politeness, I think in a lot of languages, they have a bigger distinction between formal and informal. So yeah. I think that in the past, British and American English probably used to have a lot more usage of formal language when you're talking to someone older than you, someone that you don't know.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. But of course, we don't do that anymore. And I have had some students who have told me things. I should say it like this, shouldn't I? And I think, you must have been reading a grammar book from the 1930s or something like that.
Yeah. One that always comes up for me that makes me feel weird is when students just call me teacher. Mm-hmm. Teacher, excuse me, teacher. Mm-hmm. Hey, teacher, I have a question. And I'm always like, just call me Kris. Just call me Kris. They're like, oh, but I'm being respectful because you're my teacher. And I'm like, but don't call me teacher or Mr. Teacher or something. Call me Kris.
Yeah. Did you feel tempted to say, actually, you should bow? when you address me.
Teacher.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sensei.
Yeah. So that's true. That can be tricky. You know, something that just came like just off the top of my head, it just came up. I was just thinking about it. But I've thought about this before, which is funny. The word madam. Do you ever use the word madam?
Very rare, I would say. Yeah, very rare.
And what about ma'am?
I think that's much more common in American English.
Yeah.
I think we don't say ma'am, but we might say mom.
Yeah.
But the only situation where I've heard that is after you meet the Queen. You meet the Queen and you say your royal majesty and you bow. And then after you've addressed her once by her formal title, you should just say mom. But
Okay.
otherwise, I think it's totally unused.
And to clarify, this mom is different than the mom that someone might use to call their mother.
Yes.
Right? Because in British English, this is mum.
Mum. Yeah, exactly. So we would say mum, or could say mummy if you're a child. And then in America, I think mom and occasionally mommy.
Yeah.
Mom. Yeah. Yeah. So mom and mum. That's the different sound. But yeah, it's really not used.
Yeah. Because it's so strange to me that, for example, nobody says madam, but in the States, everybody says ma'am, which is just madam with the D replaced by an apostrophe. So it's really so you know, language is so weird sometimes where you keep using some form of something that was from the past and then you drop the original one, and it can be real tricky. And then that can be really tricky when you're learning foreign languages. It's not just about English. Like you said, a lot of other languages have kind of clearer distinctions between formal and informal speech or addressing someone. And like, sure, like we can say sir or ma'am in the United States. What do you usually say to address a woman politely?
I was wondering if that might come up because honestly, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, if I wanted, for example, to address a man in London who was very formally dressed, was maybe 80 years old, I might not say, "Excuse me, can you give me directions?" I might say, "Excuse me, sir, could you give me directions?" But honestly, if it was a woman in a similar position, an older woman, very formally dressed, something like that, it would feel unnatural for me to say madam or ma'am or something like that. So I think I would be forced just to speak to her like I would anybody else. Just excuse me, could you give me directions?
That's interesting.
Yeah. So it seems like sir is a bit more used than the female equivalent, which is quite strange.
That's so interesting. And in the States, a lot of times we'll use sir and ma'am to address someone who, in a formal situation when we don't know their name, to get their attention. So like at a restaurant, a waiter or waitress, a server, they would you know, someone forgot their wallet or their bag or something, and they'd say, "Excuse me, ma'am, excuse me, sir." It's interesting. And then I mean, we have miss and misses, but it would be really strange. Like I can accept someone saying, "Excuse me, miss," but it would be really strange if someone said, "Excuse me, Mrs."
Yeah.
Right? I don't know how you
Definitely.
feel about that.
Yeah, I completely agree. Miss, it would even sound a bit strange to me, but not as strange as saying, "Excuse me, Mrs." It almost sounds a bit rude to me. Excuse
Yeah.
me, Mrs. I don't know why. It's not
Mrs.
logical.
Mrs. Someone, Mrs.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like who,
Yeah.
Mrs. What? I guess it's because Mrs. usually precedes the last name. I guess it would be similarly awkward if someone said, "Excuse me, Mr."
Yes.
Right? Because it's usually followed by the last name. And when we don't use the last name with it, then it sounds like some random person, right?
Yeah. And what about master?
So we would never, I mean, it depends. Maybe in sports, maybe if it were like your judo master or so, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But if someone said that to me A normal situation in life, I would just laugh probably.
Yeah. But did you have this though in America where an unmarried woman would be their official title would be Miss,
Yeah.
and an unmarried man would be Master?
Oh no,
You haven't come across that?
no.
No. Okay. So I'm not sure if there's an age restriction for referring to someone as Master, but so certainly before I was 18, my title would officially be Master. And it doesn't mean that I'm so great at something. I'm a judo master. It's just like Mr., Mrs., Miss for an unmarried or younger girl, or Master.
That's so interesting. So I'm learning English right now. So that's so cool. I didn't know
Yeah.
that. I'm trying to imagine what people's reaction would be here. I'm gonna try that today. When I go out in public today, I'm gonna just call someone master.
Master. Yeah, that could be fun. Yeah, so something else that's similar to that, I guess, which is still related to formalness or politeness. I remember this very funny situation. I was hiking to the top of the highest mountain in Ukraine at the time with my ex-girlfriend who is Ukrainian. And she said to me at some point, "Give me banana." Not like, "Please, may I have a banana?" or "Could I have a banana?" or "Could you give me a banana, please?" Just give me banana.
Uh-huh.
And I laughed so hard because it sounded so funny. And she said that that was just a direct translation from Ukrainian. If you want
Yeah,
something, say, "Give me that."
absolutely. Yeah. In Russian, the same, like living there
Mm.
for years, I had to adjust. Honestly, man, I had to adjust when I came back to the States because I had culture shock
Yeah.
because I was used to being very direct. I just like internalized all those qualities to survive over there. And then when I came back, I was being like way too direct. And a lot of my friends and family members would be like, yeah, you're kind of rude to people. It's kind of, you know, so yeah, and over there it was absolutely fine. It would sound strange the other way to add in the pleases and the thank yous every step of the way. It would
Yeah.
be really strange for them.
Yeah. Would it sound too polite, like obsequious,
Yeah,
something like that?
yeah, and then especially like in some public situation, like again at a restaurant, right? So uh like it's acceptable there. Like you're a very polite person, okay. But when you talk to your friends, when you talk to your family member, when you talk to the people who you see every day, you drop that stuff like really, really fast. And
Mm.
you dinner with the family or wife's family, girlfriend's friend with your friends, it's gonna be give me that.
Give me
It's
that.
gonna be yeah, yeah. I think it's a really cool topic for us to analyze because uh in my opinion, like the difficulty for me as an English speaker learning Russian was surrounding this topic of formality and politeness was um first of all, am I being too rude by by copying that directness in
Mm.
communication?
Yeah.
That was one question. And then, the other thing that really struck me was you don't really think about it in your first language, but when you see it in other languages, you start to understand it that those formalities are like a barrier, a social barrier, and they're meant to define that you are not at the same level with the other person. And so English has kind of morphed into this very informal, constantly
Mm.
informal, almost in almost every situation, type of language. And so what you see is that a lot of those lines are like blurred, and you might be in a situation with someone who's older than you, or in a situation with someone who's your teacher or your boss, and you might speak to them very informally in English, whereas in another language, it would be really important to show that boundary all the
Mm.
time. Um, and so sometimes it's hard for me to connect in a language where I have to speak to the person with words, with respectful words, and they don't have to speak back to me the same way. So like
Mm.
it makes it, there's an extra challenge there.
Yeah.
Us, because we're not used to that, I think.
Yeah. Did you think it's a bit strange that English as a language is so informal now, yet also very indirect? Because it almost makes sense, if you're going to be informal, you may as well be direct.
Right. I prefer being direct, but
Me too.
but yeah, I see that, yeah, a lot of times when I'm speaking to someone, it's like this windy road to get to the end of the sentence, and I'm just sitting there waiting. Okay, you said all the polite words, I get it, you're polite.
Yeah, I remember being here on my first trip in Poland, and I was with my friend, and he didn't seem quite as cognizant of people's level of understanding of his English as I was. And he would talk at great length to just ask something basic. He would say, you know, in a very typical stereotype British way, would you mind awfully if I could possibly do this if it didn't trouble you? And they would be like, what? they were totally lost. And all he really wanted was like, give me that. Give me the soul, you know, something like that.
Yeah. I think in some of the English textbooks, there's the funny picture of like the guy is in the river drowning, and he needs help from the guy with the life preserver, and and it's like the correct way, the incorrect way, and the guy's like, help, and the guy keeps walking. Incorrect way, correct way, excuse me, if it's not too trouble, if you could take one moment, would you possibly be able to...
Yeah.
And then the guy helps him. What do you think are some common stereotypes or misconceptions about English people that you've encountered while living abroad?
I think probably the most common one would be British people are always very polite, that we're quite formal, very self-controlled, disciplined. Basically, it's a lot of positive things that aren't true. Mostly. So, you know, there's this idea that you see in, I don't know, let's say some popular TV show like Downton Abbey. You know, everyone is very prim and proper. They always say please and thank you, and they're very sophisticated. But not all British people are like that. Or if you want to see the other side of British people, all you need to do is go on holiday to one of these Spanish resorts or Ibiza, and you'll see us getting drunk out of our minds and swearing and having fights all the time. British people love fighting. We'll fight over nothing. We'll fight anyone for no reason. When I first came to Poland, I was in an Uber, and I had a Spanish Uber driver. And he took us on a kind of an unexpected guided tour. He just said, you see this street here, never go there. They hate foreigners. They'll beat you up. And never go there. They're really racist. They hate foreigners in there. And me and my friend, we went to all of these places. Everyone was super friendly. Couldn't have been nicer. No problem with anyone. I've never had any problem with any Polish guy or anything like that ever. But after our trip, we went back to England. We went to a nightclub. Within 5 minutes, someone's tried to start a fight with us. And for nothing. For nothing. Just, you know, we walked past him and slightly touched his arm. Something like that. British people are strangely aggressive. And I think people don't expect that.
That's funny. My experience with British people has been, I think you're right on. I think spot on right there. So like this expectation of, I don't know, some sophistication or something because everyone sees the Queen and all of these things. But yeah, I found them to be just the same as ever. Like, I think Americans are very similar in a lot of ways, where everything they look so polite and nice and saying all these nice things, but a lot of it's so fake, and a lot of it is just like backhanded, you know, sneaky way to, you know what I mean? So yeah, but I think that in every country, we probably can find people who fit, you know, one description or another. But it's interesting that you brought up that the positive stereotypes are the ones that you feel are not correct.
Yeah, we've got very good PR in England. We're Downton Abbey, we're the royal family. Maybe we've got the, bit of cool from Peaky Blinders, fashion style and this kind of stuff. And there's a lot of truth in all of those things. All of those things exist. But because Britain has so much history, there is, of course, a lot of historical dramas and TV shows and films that are related to a more formal and more polite history and a romanticized version of history. So, yeah, the reality is often a bit different. And actually, I had an interesting experience with Poles, because I remember back in 2004 when Poland joined the European Union, and it was like overnight, just 1 million Polish people in England. So suddenly in some towns, you walk down the street and you just hear Polish everywhere. And it's like suddenly you've been transported to another country. And honestly, the opinion that I formed of the Poles was terrible. They were ignorant, uneducated, often looked really weird, and they did the worst jobs and they didn't do a good job. And often you'd see them drinking in the streets, getting really drunk, swearing and stuff like that. And so I had a very bad opinion of the Poles. So I'm a bit surprised actually that I was so keen to come here for a holiday. But when I came here, I realized that the group of people who came to England were not representative of the Polish people. So when I came here, I found that Polish people were, to be honest, if anything, more highly educated than English people. And I stand by that now. I find people here incredibly well educated, very polite, very friendly, and very nice looking as well, especially the ladies. So, it shows you that you can see a little cross section of a group, and it doesn't give you the right impression. In the same way, I'm sure that in these Spanish holiday resorts where, the most troublesome, fighty British people go to get drunk and have a holiday, they probably form a terrible opinion of British people based on that. But hopefully it isn't completely true.
And you're single, right?
Single, yeah.
So ladies, the link is under the video, the description.
Yeah, link in description.
Awesome. So I have one last very random question.
Mm-hmm.
If you could have a super intelligent animal sidekick, which animal would you choose?
A super intelligent animal sidekick. Wow. Never been asked that question before. I think my first reaction is something like a parrot.
A parrot, okay.
Yeah, because a parrot could just sit on my shoulder and keep an eye, watch out for things for me, whisper things in my ear that would be useful. Maybe if I'm teaching a lesson and someone asks me a difficult grammar question I don't know the answer to, then the parrot can just tell me in my ear.
Yeah, and it makes it like when you're doing the pronunciation exercises and you're trying to get the person to repeat after you and they just don't want to repeat, the parrot just repeats for you.
Yeah, that would be handy. Yeah, I think that'd be really useful. Awesome. Actually, I really enjoy teaching pronunciation. I guess because I'm a trained singer, so I had classical singing training and classical piano training, so I have a good ear, and I really like it when the students really want to pronounce things nicely. I've met some people here in Poland, and their level of English is super high. But a bit like you said earlier, sometimes you can get super high and you have not taken account of something along the way. And I often find that people get to quite an advanced level, but the pronunciation is still, it either sounds bad to us or even it's not completely clear. So I would definitely like to teach more pronunciation. Unfortunately, most of the students I've got, they only really want to learn English because they're talking to other non-native English speakers, and so pronunciation is a bit lower down on the priority list.
Mm-hmm. What's the funniest thing that a student has ever said in your class? One thing comes to mind for me. I was in a class where the question from the book was, "What's your most treasured possession?" And the girl said, "Oh, what does treasured mean?" I'm like, "Well, it's like your favorite." And What's a possession? It's a thing that you have. Okay. So she says, my favorite position is, and everyone starts laughing.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. I've had a couple of situations that were very, very funny. I'm struggling to remember one that I remember laughing a lot about, but I don't remember what was said. But I do remember I was doing phrasal verbs with one girl, and it was something like a phrasal verb with get. And it was something like, she said something that sounded like, I want to get you off. Something like that, which kind of means like, I want to please you sexually. And I don't remember what it should have been, but maybe just a different phrasal verb with get, but that was quite funny. The
phrasal verbs are pretty tricky.
They are, yeah.
And then when you get into slang and everything, it's all phrasal verbs. Just any curse word can be all kinds of different phrasal verbs and have different meanings. And a lot of people, some other people from other languages, they think that English doesn't have lots of curse words, but they don't really understand, usually the people who are saying that, how versatile they really are. And phrasal verbs can be really tricky.
Yeah, definitely.
Awesome, man. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to come here and have this talk. Tell everybody how they can find you.
People can find me under my name on Facebook, Matt Tait, M-A-T-T, surname Tait, T-A-I-T. Also, I have a website, jump-up-english.pl.
Awesome. And I'll put all those links in the description under the video, so everyone can click and go check you out.
That's great.
Awesome, man. Well, thank you so much.
Nice to speak to you, Kris. Yeah, it's been good fun.
Thank you for tuning in to English World with Kris Amerikos. Now it's your turn. Don't just listen to English, speak English with us every day. Join our English Everyday speaking program today. See you in the next episode. Bye-bye.